Hi, my name is Chris, and today I'd like to talk about the subject of peace. What is peace? It's external to us, but it also seems to flow from our consciousness. Is it based in the world or in our own mind, or a combination of the two? If we believe that the external world is real and can impose itself upon us, then peace is only possible in brief moments when the world allows us to have it. We can tweak our consciousness to temporarily be more peaceful in various situations. But we cannot own peace and make it our own, because the world determines if and when we can be peaceful. But if we believe that the world is merely a series of symbols in our mind, a dreamlike reaction to whatever we're thinking, then peace might be possible in a more lasting manner. However, even if we believe this, we're still faced with the challenge of changing our state of mind. And it seems as if our power to do so is limited. If we were not engaged in thinking about guilt, we would not even see a physical world. We would be somewhere else, doing something else, and would react to our world in a different way. Physicality is happening in our mind, and is a symbolic expression of the harshness and rough edges of the idea of guilt. Only in guilt will we see physicality. We can't see peace and think about guilt at the same time. Guilt is first and foremost an idea, and as conscious beings we're free to consider all ideas, real or unreal. But because guilt is the antithesis of peace, to think about that idea forces us to feel a lack of peace and to accept that lack of peace as a reality. The issue of what's real is very much at the heart of guilt and physicality. Once you've been swallowed by the great white whale of guilt, you are expected to believe in physicality as real without exception. The proof is that it makes you suffer, and suffering feels very real. Also, you see others suffering and can't deny the reality of their pain. Thus, the seeming reality of guilt is signed and sealed, and seemingly inescapable. But this world is one in which you can only say without exception that we're having an experience in our consciousness. Is one experience more real than another because it's painful? Pain is quote-unquote real in the sense that we can't deny that we're experiencing, but there's another aspect of the word real that we should really examine, because in our mind we can engage in fictions or imagine things that aren't real. But fictions cannot change the underlying nature of reality, and they can deceive us about the nature of reality. If someone deceives us, not just once but over time, we develop a relationship not only with that person but with the lie that they've woven around us. To us the lie is real because we've mistakenly placed our trust in someone who's untrustworthy, and the result is that we believe something that's not true and we're deceived. Not only are we deceived, but if we act on that deception, we might cause harm to others who are innocent. The harm comes to them because we've been deceived, and our actions are at odds with the truth. If we have experiences without questioning their reality, we've lost the ability to act outside the lie that we've become involved in. Illusions and lies are very much a part of our world, and certainly the superficial nature of our physical world is different from what a scientist sees through an electron microscope. Our world is built on illusions and ignorance. Nothing is quite what it seems to be on a superficial level. If our physical experience is not what it appears to be on the surface, then we're living and acting in accordance with a lie. If life is mental rather than physical, then physicality is a quality of feeling rather than a quality of the reality of the world around us. We don't fundamentally know we're really perceiving anything. All we know for certain is that we're having an internal experience of some sort, and we interpret that as perception. Peace has slipped away from us and has been taken prisoner by the external world, which makes sure that we can never have it back for any length of time. But was peace ever the world's to be taken away in the first place? Did it ever have the right to take it? Critical examination could question the reality of suffering in the world and bring the issue back inside of consciousness where it all started, because that's the only place that we can hope to find lasting peace. If the external world is nothing but a product of our own guilt, then the obvious solution is to cease thinking in guilt terms, to evolve our mind in guilt to the conscious level. Removing guilt from our mind should alleviate some of our suffering, but even so, our subconscious mind continues to think about guilt, and the result is more suffering. In actuality, part of the illusion is the separation of the conscious and subconscious mind. There is no such thing as a subconscious mind, really, but rather it's merely a part of our mind that we've been trained not to identify with. This misidentification is due to the nature of guilt, which has split our inherently whole mind into separate parts. The separation of your mind into these parts is essentially the nature of how your mind sustains the illusion of guilt, because without a subconscious mind, you'd immediately remember what you're doing and realizing, and you would realize that the world is an illusion, and you could simply put a stop to creating it. Guilt and external experience are built on hiding the activity of your own consciousness from itself, the right hand not knowing what the left hand is doing. We are creating the world through thinking about guilt, and we're doing it consciously at some level. This is the big dirty secret in our mind, that it's in fact one mind weaving the illusion. And it's only out of a desire to understand guilt that our mind engages in this game of duplicity, hiding itself from its own motives. But as we wake up to a conscious level where we're aware that we want to be free from guilt, our whole mind must respond to our desire, and guilt must begin to slip away. But we're faced with the vast nature of our own attachment to guilt. Our desire to understand it is the only thing that's keeping us from being free from it. Where does guilt hide? It hides in our relationships, where we harbor lingering resentments towards others. Every hidden resentment goes on in our mind all the time, even though we're not consciously thinking about it. The undoing of this resentment is the key to healing guilt. Engaging in a guiltless state of mind allows you to re-examine your past in a new light and to reconsider what happened to you, so that you're no longer mentally playing out the part of a victim. You can see that you and the other person were merely exchanging symbols about guilt, and the other person possessed no free will. And then in reality, they never really did anything to you, since it's impossible for anyone to do anything to anyone else in reality. I suffer from chronic depression, and I experience many unwanted effects of that mental illness on my actions, my thinking, and my quality of life. People refuse to accept my condition and its impacts, instead blaming me. Not understanding what's going on in my mind, they criminalize me for something that I've been unable to fix, despite my best efforts, and I've spent a lifetime trying to fix it. I manage it pretty well, but it's still a problem, and it goes on even to this very day. I can't stop people from misperceiving me, and this is something that I've simply had to accept. But this kind of misperception is exactly what happens in the beginning of forming guilt in the mind towards others, because we impose upon them some sort of free will that they don't possess to escape their problems and issues and attitudes. We see them as choosing to be who they are, rather than being stuck in an identity that's sort of a trap and limited by it. And so we come to hate them for the freedom that we think that they possess, which they never really possessed in the first place. And this criminalization of others goes on in all directions, everywhere around us. It goes on internally with ourselves, where we blame ourselves for our past actions that were merely reactions to what we were experiencing in the moment. In the future, after that decision or action has happened, we artificially impose upon ourselves a free will that we never possessed in the past, and then use it to judge and condemn ourselves. It's like a doorstop or a wedge that jams itself between what happened and who we were in that moment, somehow creating a third party that never really existed. We then blame and accuse ourselves, when in reality, in that moment, there was only one way that we could react, and that was it. Hindsight being what it was, we now see things differently, and we judge ourselves by creating a false sense of free will in that past moment that we didn't possess, thus creating a lie about ourselves and condemning and punishing ourselves. We possess conscience, and that is sufficient. Conscience doesn't need to be bolstered by guilt. Guilt punishes, thus appearing to fulfill some role in self-education and reform. But conscience alone is sufficient for learning and growth. Guilt is the bully that steps in and beats you into conformity so that you do the quote-unquote right things. But in the process, it severs your relationship with your own conscience, thus destroying your own self-confidence and awareness that you are whole within yourself. Our relationship with our conscience is harmed by the existence of guilt, which attempts to take over its function and does it poorly, and can mislead us and pull us in various directions that we should not go, acting against our own best interests. If we want to restore our faith in our own conscience, we have to clear away guilt enough so that we can live out of conscience rather than guilt and see that we don't need it. Guilt creates a false need for us to be punished, where mere learning would be sufficient. After all, in the moment, we did the only thing we could do. But because guilt has interfered with our conscience so long, we've come to believe that guilt is our conscience, and without it we'd be amoral monsters who would be out of control. This perception would never have happened if our conscience was uninhibited by guilt. Because we never experience the removal of guilt, however, we don't get an opportunity to see this for ourselves, to clear away guilt long enough to understand that it's a needless parasite and a problem that's exploiting us and using us at the same time destroying the quality of our life. Our conscience never needed to be propped up by a moralistic bully who stands over you, threatening to beat you at every particular moment in which you don't do the quote-unquote right thing. And guilt in the mind also creates hatred, rebellion, and self-destructive tendencies, because the more you feel suppressed and oppressed by this bullying force, the more you lose track of what real right or wrong is and what would be in your best interest as a person. Since moralistic goodness demands that we hurt ourselves as a sacrifice to help others, we end up questioning everything and hating goodness as our enemy because, in a sense, it's crucifying us every single day. Our conscience can guide us to what's right and wrong. It's an instinctual and internal part of us, and it does not need to be bullied or pushed around by guilt. But what can never be tested can never gain any credibility. If we never stop guilt and never allow it to stop, but protect it, then we're protecting something that's preventing us from seeing our own nature. If we can never remove guilt from our mind, even for short periods of time, we'll never have the opportunity to live long enough without it to understand that we don't need it and that it's parasitic. We must come to see the inherent hypocrisy of guilt and the ways in which it harms us, and then as we question and live without it, we can finally allow it to fall away naturally. How many times have others imposed upon us their standards for our behavior just for their own self-serving purposes? People have slaved away at low-paying jobs for decades because they were taught the value of hard work as a moral lesson. But even as they slaved away, others worked to deplete the world of its riches and laughed at their hard work, thinking of them as boobs and idiots, and through legally sanctioned criminality as well. People got rich off the back of the poor in the past and are still doing it today. The mantra of hard work was a way of enslaving the masses, who were taught to never look up and see the obvious, that they were being used. This is criminality disguised as morality, and it exists in many forms throughout our world. Conscience, unimpeded by guilt, is able to recognize this sort of deception. But when guilt grips the mind, there's fear of being punished, fear of inconveniencing other people, fear of causing anger, as well as the anger, rage, and pain at the injustice of it all and the inability to do anything about it, and ending up feeling like a victim. This is the price we pay for our parasitic relationship with guilt. We are all one at the highest level of reality. We cannot even conceive of harming each other, nor would such a thought even mean anything to us there. That's where we want to be, in this higher level of reality where we can have anything we want and be happy. Not in a world of suffering where everyone is at odds with each other and trust is rare and peace is almost extinct. Everything we want, including peace, is already within us. All that's required of us is to cease thinking about guilt and to cease thinking in guilt terms. Guilt catches us by demanding that we believe that the physical experience is both real and emotionally compelling. It covers the nature of reality, hiding it from our sight and demanding we worship our new and debased god of war, conflict, and bloodshed. There is no trap to extricate ourselves from. We must simply cease to think about guilt and think in guilt terms. And if we do that, the illusions that it has created in our mind will gradually withdraw. And when we recognize that guilt has inserted itself into all of our relationships as resentment and unrealistic ideals which we have imposed upon people, then we'll see that all we need to do is remove guilt from our thinking about these people, rethink our relationships, and healing will flow into them. Peace is the absence of guilt. It is only in ceasing to think about guilt, to believe in guilt, and to engage in guilt as a mode of thought that we'll be able to begin the process of healing that will eventually bring us back to peace. Other people may not understand or support our efforts, but we are doing what we have to do to take back our lives from guilt. We have to bind our lives to guiltlessness. If we take the time to stop using guilt in our minds, to stop thinking in guilt terms, and to make a change, we'll witness the healing that occurs when you do that, and we'll begin to gain faith in that process. Having seen those glimpses for ourselves, we'll come to understand that we need to possess that more than anything else in this life, and nothing else will satisfy us. The world is full of forms, shapes, things we can do, activities, distractions, work, busyness, but all these things will not bring us peace. In order to get peace, we're going to have to do away with guilt in our thinking. At any time during the day you can do this. Simply stop what you're doing, sit quietly, and think to yourself, I want to stop using guilt. I want to stop thinking in guilt terms. Say this to yourself a few times, and then sit quietly for a few minutes and just keep that intention flowing in your mind, repeating it gently as you breathe in and out. If you do this, you'll probably notice a feeling of peace flowing into you gradually over time. However, if your mind goes back to anger, simply reset, sit down, and do it again. Anger in any form, in your imagination, your thoughts, is a clear sign that you're using guilt. If you're having worry or fear or anger or any of those kinds of things, simply sit down and refresh it. Do it again. You will find with practice that guiltlessness will flow in and you'll experience healing. You'll see that healing when you interact with other people. You'll see it in the quality of your interactions with people. You'll see it in the quality of your internal thought processes. You'll feel it as a loving feeling that embraces your whole being. And it will in time convince you of the need to get rid of guilt from your mind. Thanks, and have a great week.